You probably already know that after the age of 40, your body begins to slowly lose muscle mass, and that this loss accelerates even further after 60. But there is a detail that few people are aware of. The strength you lose disappears even faster than the muscle itself. Long-term follow-up studies show that after the age of 75, strength declines between 2.5% and 5% per year, a rate 2 to 5 times faster than the loss of muscle mass itself. This explains why many people seem to have a reasonably decent body, yet struggle to lift weight, open a jar, or climb a hill. At the same time, the heart, lungs, and blood vessels also lose efficiency with a sedentary lifestyle, which silently increases cardiovascular risk. In other words, two different systems in your body are deteriorating at the same time, through different pathways, and each of them has one exercise that promises to solve the problem. So, if I asked you right now, without thinking twice, after the age of 50, what protects your body more, lifting weights or doing cardio? Most people answer immediately with complete conviction, and the curious thing is that the answer changes entirely depending on who you ask. A cardiologist talks about the heart, an orthopedist talks about bones and joints, a personal trainer talks about muscle mass, and while these opinions clash with one another, you are still left not knowing where it is worth investing your time, which is also not infinite. Today, you will see a side-by-side comparison between the two, with studies, numbers, and research groups aiming to show you exactly what science found when it tested both head-to-head in the same type of people, in the same age range you are in right now. Stay attentive until the end, because the answer the data reveals is more definitive than you might imagine, and it is probably not the one you were expecting. Let us start by analyzing what science found about cardio. First, real protection against heart disease and mortality. The heart, after 50, begins to lose elasticity in the arteries and pumping efficiency. Regular aerobic training, whether brisk walking, cycling, or swimming, is the most studied tool in medicine for reversing part of this. It improves the heart's ability to pump blood, reduces arterial stiffness, and lowers resting blood pressure. And the impact on blood pressure is not small. Studies published by cardiology associations show average reductions between 5 and 7 millimeters of mercury in systolic pressure in adults who practice moderate cardio consistently, an effect comparable to some classes of antihypertensive medication in mild cases. Second, the impact on the brain is measurable. It is not just a sense of well-being. One of the most cited studies in exercise neuroscience, conducted by Kirk Erickson and published in the scientific journal PNAS, followed 120 older, sedentary adults for 1 year. One group walked for 40 minutes, 3 times a week. The other group only did stretching. The result? The group that walked experienced a 2% increase in hippocampal volume, the region of the brain associated with memory, reversing between 1 and 2 years of the natural shrinkage that this area undergoes with age. The stretching group continued to shrink normally. This means that walking is not only good for the heart, it is one of the few proven interventions capable of making your brain physically grow again after the age of 50. Third, metabolic control, cholesterol, and blood sugar. Cardio improves insulin sensitivity and supports a healthier cholesterol profile, increasing the good cholesterol and helping to control the bad cholesterol. This is decisive because insulin resistance becomes increasingly common after 50, serving as a gateway to type 2 diabetes. The clinical recommendation is around 150 minutes of moderate activity per week to reap this benefit. No extreme effort is required. Fourth, mental health without relying solely on medication. A systematic review published in a scientific journal, which directly compared aerobic exercise, strength training, and mind-body exercises such as yoga and tai chi in older adults with depression, gathered more than 5,000 participants across 82 controlled studies. The conclusion was clear. All 3 types of exercise reduce depressive symptoms in a meaningful way, with no statistically significant difference between them. In other words, cardio works very well for mood, but pay attention, strength training works equally well. Keep that information in mind because it will be important in a moment. Fifth, more energy in daily life. It may seem counterintuitive, but those who practice cardio regularly report more energy, not less. This happens because the cardiorespiratory system becomes more efficient at transporting oxygen, which reduces fatigue during simple tasks like climbing stairs or carrying grocery bags. With these 5 points, it becomes clear why nearly every doctor, without exception, recommends walking. The problem is that most people stop there, as if walking alone solved everything. And this is exactly where the second half of the story comes in, because there is an entire set of protections that cardio on its own is simply not capable of providing. First, it is the only truly effective tool against sarcopenia. Remember what I mentioned at the beginning? It is estimated that a person over the age of 65 loses roughly 8% of muscle mass per decade. A cross-sectional study with older adults between 65 and 70 years of age who already met the recommendation of 150 minutes of weekly aerobic activity revealed something striking. Only those who also did strength training at least twice a week showed a significantly lower risk of sarcopenia. Those who did cardio only, even within the recommended guidelines, did not have that protection. This means, with data in hand, that walking, despite all the benefits you have seen, is not enough to preserve muscle. Mechanical overload is required, and only strength training delivers that. Second, bone density, a benefit that cardio simply does not provide to the same degree. After menopause, bone loss accelerates, increasing the risk of osteoporosis and fractures. A controlled study with postmenopausal women with osteopenia, published in a scientific journal, applied a 6-month strength training protocol and measured bone mineral density by dual energy absorptiometry. The group that trained with weights had an increase of 1.82% in bone density, while the control group had virtually no change. Other systematic reviews with multiple studies confirm consistent gains in bone density in the lumbar spine and femoral neck, precisely the regions most associated with serious fractures after the age of 60. Third, a real reduction in fall risk, with a number that is hard to ignore. The Cochrane Review, considered the gold standard in evidence-based medicine, analyzed tens of thousands of older adults and compared different types of exercise in fall prevention. Balance exercises alone reduced the fall rate by 24%, but when the protocol combined balance with strength training, the reduction jumped to 34%. This is enormous when you remember that falling is one of the leading causes of loss of independence and even death in people over 65. Fourth, protection against overall mortality, cardiovascular mortality, and even cancer. Here is a piece of data that most fitness content creators ignore. A meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, gathering studies with thousands of participants, showed that practicing any amount of strength training reduces the risk of death from any cause by 15%. The risk of death from cardiovascular disease by 19%, and the risk of death from cancer by 14% compared to doing no strength training at all. And the strongest effect was observed at a relatively low volume, close to 60 minutes of strength training per week, with a risk reduction of up to 27%. Much higher volumes did not bring proportional additional benefit. In other words, you do not need to become a bodybuilder to reap this benefit. Fifth, functional strength for real life. Lifting a heavy bag, sitting down and getting up from the couch without pushing off with your hands, playing on the floor with a grandchild, climbing stairs while carrying something. All of this depends on muscular strength, not cardiovascular endurance. Strength training, especially with multi-joint exercises such as squats, rows, and bench press, transfers directly to these everyday tasks, restoring the independence that many people lose without even realizing it. Sixth, yes, there is a hormonal response, but without the exaggeration that many videos out there tend to promise. It is true that after 50, the production of testosterone and growth hormone naturally declines, both in men and in women to a lesser extent. A study published in an applied physiology journal, which compared 63-year-old men with 23-year-old men in a progressive strength training program, showed that a single training session triggers a significant acute release of growth hormone in older individuals as well, although to a lesser magnitude than in younger people, and that this effect was maintained even after 12 weeks of training. The testosterone response to training in older men, however, proved to be more subtle and less consistent than the growth hormone response in those same studies. In other words, strength training does genuinely activate this hormonal system. Just do not expect a miraculous effect along the lines of training replaces hormone replacement therapy. The real benefit lies more in the maintenance of lean mass over the years than in an isolated hormonal peak. Neither method is perfect on its own, and it is important for you to know where each one falls short. So let us talk about the disadvantages. Cardio in excess, with no strength stimulus whatsoever, has a silent problem. It does not prevent the loss of muscle mass, and in some cases, when done at very high volumes combined with caloric restriction, it can actually accelerate that loss. This is the classic scenario of the person who loses weight but ends up looking soft, the so-called skinny fat body, where the body fat percentage remains high despite the low scale weight, because muscle was lost along the way. Strength training done alone, with no aerobic component at all, leaves a different gap. The cardiovascular system does not receive the same conditioning stimulus, which can mean less efficiency of the heart and lungs during prolonged endurance activities, as well as less control of factors such as resting blood pressure, which responds particularly well to the aerobic component. There is also a myth that needs to be put to rest right now. Strength training does not destroy joints after 50. On the contrary, when performed correctly with proper technique and appropriate load progression, it strengthens tendons and ligaments and improves joint lubrication. What actually causes harm is excessive load without proper preparation, not the stimulus itself. When researchers directly compare groups doing aerobic training, groups doing strength training, and groups combining both, a pattern consistently repeats itself. Each modality in isolation strongly improves what it trains, and improves little to nothing that it does not train. Pure cardio groups show significant improvements in cardiorespiratory capacity, but gains in strength and lean mass are minimal. Pure strength groups show clear increases in strength and bone density, but aerobic conditioning advances very little. Yet groups that combine both modalities within the same weekly routine are consistently the only ones that show simultaneous improvement across multiple markers: strength, aerobic capacity, body composition, and in many protocols, also in blood pressure markers and metabolic profile. This is what the literature calls concurrent training, and although there is a technical debate about minor interference with maximum strength gains when cardio volume is very high, for the vast majority of people over 50 who are not competitive athletes, that interference is irrelevant compared to the overall health benefit. In other words, if your goal is to compete in Olympic weightlifting, it may be worth discussing the exact ratio between the two stimuli with a specialized coach. But if your goal is to reach your 70s and 80s still walking, climbing stairs, and carrying your own belongings without help, that concern simply does not apply to you. Before closing with the verdict, I need to alert you to 3 mistakes that I see repeated every single week in the comments and in gyms. The first mistake is thinking that light training is synonymous with safe training. Many people over 50 train with such low loads that the stimulus is simply not enough to generate adaptation. The body only signals to preserve muscle and bone when it encounters a real progressive overload within the person's capacity. Training with the same 4.5-pound weights for 3 years does not protect anyone from sarcopenia. The second mistake is the opposite: skipping steps. People who spent years being sedentary and decide overnight to lift maximum loads or run long distances without gradual progression or assessment of mobility and posture. It is this kind of impulsive decision, and not strength training or cardio itself, that tends to cause injury. The third mistake is the most common of all: stopping completely after a good period. Many people train consistently for 3 or 4 months, see results, relax, disappear from their routine for weeks, and then start from zero again, always in the cycle of starting over on Monday. The benefits we have seen throughout this video, especially bone protection and protection against mortality, depend on consistency over years, not on isolated peaks of effort. After all of this, the answer is not cardio or strength training. The answer is understanding that you are fighting 2 different battles at the same time: the battle against the loss of muscle and bone, and the battle against cardiovascular and metabolic deterioration. Ignoring either side leaves a door wide open. The World Health Organization itself, in its updated physical activity guidelines, is direct about this for people over 65. The recommendation is between 150 and 300 minutes of moderate aerobic activity per week, or between 75 and 150 minutes of vigorous activity. In addition, at least 2 days per week of strength training involving the major muscle groups. And specifically for this age group, at least 3 days per week of activity that works balance and strength in a combined fashion, precisely to reduce the fall risk we discussed a moment ago. In practice, a realistic weekly distribution that anyone can fit into their routine could look like this: Monday, full body strength training. Tuesday, a brisk walk of 25 to 30 minutes. Wednesday, another strength training session, varying the exercises. Thursday, cycling or swimming at a moderate pace for 20 to 30 minutes. Friday, a third strength training session of the week. Saturday, a longer, more relaxed walk or an active leisure activity. Sunday, active rest with stretching or light mobility work. This distribution alone already comfortably covers the 150 minutes of recommended cardio and still ensures 3 weekly sessions of strength stimulus, exactly within the range that the mortality studies identified as most effective. An important note for those just starting out: there is no need to train heavily every day. or to run every day. Consistency over months is worth far more than intensity during a few isolated weeks. And if you have any pre-existing mobility limitations or joint pain, the ideal starting point is always an assessment with a certified fitness professional or physical therapist who will adapt the load and progression to your individual history. For those who already have a few months of training as a foundation, it is worth thinking in blocks, what the training literature calls periodization. During periods of greater stress, poor sleep, or a more demanding schedule, it is reasonable to prioritize light to moderate cardio because it tends to reduce cortisol and support overall recovery. During periods of better energy and good sleep, that is the time to slightly increase the intensity of strength training, taking advantage of the body's recovery capacity to consolidate gains in muscle mass and strength. Alternating these phases throughout the year prevents plateaus and keeps the body responding to stimuli, rather than repeating the same routine over and over without any variation. So, strength training or cardio after 50? Science has already answered. Both in the right proportion, with consistency, is what separates those who reach old age with full independence from those who lose it far too soon. Strength training protects your muscles, your bones, and your ability to do everyday things on your own. Cardio protects your heart, your blood vessels, and as you saw in the hippocampus study, it literally protects your brain. Choosing only one of the two means giving up half of the protection you could have. If this video helped you see that with greater clarity, leave a like, comment below which of the two you are going to prioritize this week, and subscribe to the channel to keep receiving science-based content about training after 50.